Well, I've been hearing from bank victims since the year 2000. It happened by accident, and then I started writing articles, and then I heard from more bank victims, and it's been going on for 18 years. And I'm frankly worn out and depressed as hell by the experience. I've got no particular formal expertise in this arena other than being teaching political economy for decades. I have a sense of bastardry out there amongst the world. So, by hearing all these stories, year after year, I have an atypical understanding of the character of the malpractice and the corruption by banks in particular, and of the widespread extent. And the Royal Commission, because of its broad brief, has really only covered the surface of it. As Pat mentioned last month, there's a new book out called Wrong Way. That has a chapter on trade. I've got the chapter in there on banking, so there's 5,000 words in there which sums it up. Also, there's a NAB victim couple which have their own site called bankvictims.com.au, and they gave me a special section, so a lot of my articles are on bankvictims.com.au.
Oh, your phone?
Sorry, turn that off. Also, so as for the focus tonight, I could have, told you more horror stories, and that would be a bit of polemic, but Peter especially wanted me to focus on the positive things, what possible changes would I recommend. I'd have to say I'm a bit of a pessimist, and I think that's rationally based in terms of my experience. So, there's recommendations you would make ideally, and what's going to actually happen in practice. They're two different things. But we'll go for the utopian recommendations in the first instance. The problem in brief, actually I had an article a couple of weeks ago in Green Left Weekly on the problem being systemic, and that's short, and that's on bankvictims.com.au, and you can have a look at the character. But in essence, you've got entrenched what the legals call unconscionable conduct, that's civil, and you've got straight out corruption or fraud, which is criminal. The issue is that it is entrenched and it's deeply institutionalised, and the banks know that they have absolute immunity in what they do. And really the immunity started with Labor's Martin inquiry in 1991, which was a whitewash, a strategic whitewash, and after that it was self-regulation, a banking ombudsman and the code of banking practice, both of which are complete bullshit. Mostly I've heard from small business people and farmers, the odd unclassifiable mortgage holder victim, but in particular the small business and farmers have not been, there's the odd token appearance in the hearings, but they've been very poorly covered in the media, and of course we've got good coverage of the other arenas by Adolf Ferguson et al. In Fairfax. Okay, a few things as preliminary. The government, the coalition government, has made a few changes in the last few years, and they're all rather cynical and pragmatic in order to head off a Royal Commission or anything more dramatic. A couple of things are worth mentioning. They created a small business ombudsman and put in charge Kate Carnell, well, she was previously a Liberal Party functionary with no credentials whatsoever, but ironically that's backfired. Having seen the nature of the beast, she's become very sympathetic to bank victims, and so that has been de facto a positive step. Banning unfair contract terms in the incredibly complex contracts that borrowers face. The legislated that several years ago. The banks have been ignoring it all that time, so that's an ongoing struggle, but an ongoing reflection that the banks don't really give a damn what's in the law. APRA was forced to act after sitting on their bums forever, complicit in terms of the CBA indifference to all that money laundering, and they brought down a hard-hitting report. Ironically, by three members, all I won't go into the details, but all of whom have been totally complicit in the problems to date. I might mention as a way in terms of the complicity of the regulators that APRA was similarly forced into a review of the NAB with its currency trading fiasco in 2003-2004. It was a good report. The NAB then proceeded to ignore it, and APRA sat on its bum for another 14 years, and it's more of the same. So, some changes by the government. There's another thing called BER, Banking Executive Accountability Regime, brought in a year ago. Again, pragmatism, but they're actually trying to nail responsibilities for the actions of the company itself on the specific individuals. And there's some merit in that, and if it can be entrenched, that would be complemented by other things. So that's not rubbish, but the banks hate it, and we'll see how we go. Productivity Commission report recently on increasing competition. Absolute rubbish. All the experts think that competition is everything. From the Campbell report 1981 onwards, you don't need to do anything because competition will solve everything. Well, they completely miss the whole thing, that there is a de facto cartel in terms of how they operate, and the second tier merely follows the big four in carrying out the same corrupt practices. More deeply, the problem more deeply, I think, look, to be brutally simplistic, but I think degree of honesty, absolutely everybody is corrupt. Now, I spent my whole life at university and mostly in a radical dissident department, and I had no idea. You only read books in university, and it's only when you get it from the horse's mouth that you get a feeling for what's going on. At the centre of the institution, the key element, basically having a banking licence is an ideal vehicle for corruption. And so you have any borrower faces what I would call a profound asymmetry with the lender. The lender can dictate terms, and in particular with small business and farmers who borrowed hundreds and thousands of millions, they are utterly vulnerable, dependent, and the bank can default the borrower at will. The contract is meaningless as far as the borrower goes. There are no obligations on the part of the lender. So some things are formally illegal, some things are formally legal. It doesn't matter a damn whether they're legal or not. They are legitimated by the authorities and by the courts. So the banks, in order to carry out their corruption, have a wide range of so-called professional hangers-on, all dependent on the bank teaks. Law firms, utterly corrupt. Gaydon's currently at the top of the pops of illegality, many others. Receivers, utterly corrupt. A previous head of ASIC went to work for PPB, a receiver, straight after. The valuers, utterly corrupt. The bank says to the valuer, devalue this property so that they're no longer within an acceptable loan to valuation ratio and we default, etc. Selective real estate agents, blah, blah, blah. The regulators, complicit. The pollies, inactive, indifferent, dependent on bank funding of party funds, blah, blah, blah. I mean, a high degree of ignorance as well. The courts biased, heavily biased in terms of the nature of legal education. We could spend a whole night on that and we won't go into it. But the victims do not get justice in the courts, of which more in a minute. Just before I move on, apropos the pollies, we're in this utterly bizarre situation where the only staffer in Parliament House working on bank corruption full time is Leon Ashby, who's the staffer for Senator Fraser Anning, who is on the nose for a variety of reasons. Ex-One Nation, now Qatar, and he's scatterbrained, and he's just ignorant. But the stark reality is that none of the other parties, the big three plus Greens, are prepared to devote the staff full time to what is, along with refugees, climate change, a couple of other things, a comprehensively significant problem. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, on to my changes, and then I'll talk a bit about Payne and the Commission after that. So this is where I'm supposed to say the positive things. So I've got 9 suggestions, and we can elaborate on these things during the discussion. We'll find, dramatically increase the fines applicable to banks for various crimes. For a long time they've been fairly trivial, or not applied at all. Significantly expand them, enhance them so that they are a major disincentive to shareholders to invest in bank shares, which really scares the board and the CEOs, etc. Now, as it happens, there was a Senate inquiry into penalties for white-collar crime started in 2015, reported in 2017. It got 0 reportage in the media. The government actually responded positively to it, and that report did recommend dramatically increased penalties. But it seems to have had little effect to date, save for one instance, and that's when APRA was forced into dealing with the CBA and its money laundering its tolerance of money laundering. You would have read in Fairfax that with thousands of instances of breaches, failure to report, they could have been up for $1 trillion in fines. Well, you could buy a Commonwealth Bank. As it happens, I think it was APRA, or I forget who, the government fined the Commonwealth Bank $700 million for that breach, which is historically unprecedented. So that's a huge start. They also demanded an extra $1 billion in capital requirement in the interim until they've fixed their culture and their problems. So that's a start and positive, but still, frankly, not enough. The real problem with fines is that it affects the institution, and the senior management is not touched. They're oblivious, the board is not touched. The shareholders and the customers ultimately pay the price. So I think it's important that fines escalate, but nevertheless by itself insufficient. I'd also like to see that all fines go into a fund that as a basis for compensation for past victims. Here's a real problem with the Royal Commission. Nowhere are we talking compensation or what the government calls legacy issues. I mean, you're up for billions, tens of billions of dollars of what really begins the day after financial deregulation during the early 80s, starting with the foreign currency loan scam, and it's been corruption ever since with the lack of rules. So I think if they've got any smarts, they are really scared about the scale of potential compensation. That's something that's got to be fought for long term. It's not even on the agenda at the moment. Behind the scenes, when any particular bank gets into trouble, it offers a settlement to a particular customer that's got them over the ropes. The settlement is trivial and the settlement is confidential under pressure from the bank. So it's utterly appalling at the moment. So any fines achieved, I think, need to go into the beginning of a compensation fund, a future fund for victims past and present. Second recommendation, divestment of the things the banks have acquired since the late 80s and early 90s, that is wealth management and, quote, wealth management, wealth theft, superannuation management and insurance. So when the banks acquired the demutualised insurance companies, CBA's takeover of Colonial, the demutualised Colonial is representative of the issue. NAB got MLC, etc., etc. Now, under pressure from the Royal Commission, NAB, CBA and ANZ are already moving to divest of their, quote, wealth management arena. So they've proved to be difficult anyway. Westpac's still holding out. So that's on the cards, but I think divestment there is crucial. Get rid of all that pressurised cross-selling. My third general recommendation is we need a specialist fraud unit, a financial investigation unit at some level of the police force. I don't know enough details. It would need to be federal or possibly even state with cooperation, possibly the AFP. The AFP does do the odd financial investigation, but I don't see, I think they don't have any specialist unit. At the moment, when you get perennial fraud against customers, the customer, according to my witnesses, have to go to the local police station, and you get this hierarchy whether they decide to take the case forward or not, and if you get some enthusiastic people at the lower level, it's often chopped off at the upper level. And one particular arena of nastiness that the banks involved in, they often tolerate little criminal gangs operating against customers with one or two players inside the bank itself. And they do not act against this, but ultimately act against the defrauded customer. several instances of this have been given media attention by The Age in Melbourne, but instances I know about in Sydney and the Gold Coast are completely off the radar. So you need a specialist fraud investigation unit. You can go for the jugular. Fourth recommendation, the federal ICAC. This is one of the most promising things because there's people across the spectrum, political spectrum, who are sympathetic to this and get with collaboration across regulators and the criminals at the federal level. Fifth recommendation, ASIC and the Ombudsman, FOSS, Financial Ombudsman Service, what to do about that. Now frankly I've got no answers to that at all. ASIC and FOSS completely complicit. Several whistleblowers, including Jeff Morris from the CBA, but others have worked inside, say the problem is deeply entrenched. ASIC was created out of the Australian Securities Commission in 1998 following the Wallace Committee to cover consumer protection as well. They have never really acquired a competence in consumer protection. The ASC's brief was really about information transparency. Consumer protection is entirely another issue. I've been privy to a lot of correspondence between ASIC and victim complainants, and you would tear your hair out with this correspondence that ASIC has these form letters in which they lie to the victims, completely saying we do not have legislative responsibility for this issue. You're not significant enough case. We only deal with cases of systemic significance. You should go away and bugger off and take your case to the courts, acquiring a suitable lawyer. FOSS, Financial Ombudsman, is funded by the banks. I don't know what to say about that. The government has recently incorporated FOSS with a couple of other mediation services into one overarching body, AFCA, but all the same most of the same key personnel, including some known corrupt participants, are being carried over into the new body, so I don't see any satisfaction there. The British equivalent of the Financial Ombudsman Service is a public body. Here it's bank funded. But I think the problems run deeper than that, and I honestly have no answers on that regard. Just one particular instance about ASIC. In 1998, following a fantastic parliamentary inquiry into small business abuse by corporates, the Howard government legislated several progressive changes to the Trade Practices Act, and that included business-to-business unconscionable conduct provisions. So the ACCC could go in support of a small business against a corporate creditor, which was always difficult in the Trade Practices Act. In 2001, that component was moved across to ASIC for financial services, so that ASIC had the legislative ability, indeed obligation, to go in for that of small business or farmers being subject to abuse, predation, fraud by banks. Not a single case has been taken since 2002 when it went into effect. Not a single case. And it's absolutely criminal. And I've written to successive ASIC chairmen and they tell me to bugger off. And they lied to me. And because I'm irrelevant, nobody pays me any attention whatsoever. So I've got no answer there. It is interesting that Alan Fowles, who frankly I don't have a huge respect for, I mean he did some useful things as head of the ACCC, but he is publicly known and respected, and he's gone in about to say ASIC should lose its responsibilities in this regard and should go back to the ACCC. Recommendation 6, form a new public bank. Now, earlier I mentioned, recommendations that are in the utopian side as opposed to what are achievable. And I think the mentality amongst all those in office, politicians, bureaucracy, experts, is such that they've wiped out the past. They've got no historical knowledge, no memory. That the notion of a public bank for these people is preposterous and meaningless, even though other countries still have them, including Germany, a powerhouse. They will quote what happened to the State Bank of Victoria, the Savings Bank of Victoria and the State Bank of South Australia in the 80s after deregulation, and the Rural and Industries Bank in WA. Now that was a tragedy and a scandal, but it didn't have to do with public ownership, it had to do with deregulation. That lasted since 1900 until 1990, so something good must have been going on. But the thing to look at, they don't know anything that goes on in Germany because they don't speak English, so we won't pay any attention to them. The thing that's relevant is just across the Tasman, the Kiwi Bank. God almighty. And that was started by peculiar political circumstances in 2001. It's actually going strong. It's moved beyond what we would call a credit union type mentality. I looked up their website, they've got 2,500 employees. So if anything, if anybody's interested in Canberra, they should first look and talk to the experienced people running the Kiwi Bank. The thing that I really lament regarding a public bank, well, apart from the privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank itself, if that hadn't been privatised, you wouldn't have got all those branch closures across the suburbs and regional towns right across the country, and apparently it's just starting up again on the south coast in New South Wales. But the Commonwealth Bank would have been still there by order. The thing that I really lament is the murder of the Commonwealth Development Bank in 1996 after the full privatisation of the Commonwealth Bank. And they had specialist staff to deal with small business and farm borrowers, and that was wiped out. So, the real issue is how do you reproduce banking staff that have the right culture and the right expertise? These days in banks there is no training for lending because it's too expensive. So you take security on the whole goddamn assets of the borrower, including the borrower's parents or relatives, and if a cyclone hits Queensland, as it does every couple of years, brilliant. Opportunity to default, and you take all their assets. And that's it. That's how banking operates. It's not banking, it's money lending. And it's rooted in an imperative to malpractice and fraud. And as we saw on 7:30 report last night, in a brief, excellent little summation of Royal Commission hearings, there was a brief thing on the Hearst farming couple in Tasmania when the ANZ took over the landmark, changed the contract terms. Is that illegal? No, it isn't. It's done every day of the week by one bank taking over another. And nobody cares a damn. And so the ANZ changed the terms and they defaulted. That's recommendation 6. Recommendation 7. send bank CEOs and executives to jail. Ultimately, this is the only way you're going to change the culture. There's the odd thing about how can we change the culture. You've got to change the culture. It isn't going to happen as long as the structural imperatives are there for malpractice. Now, you've got a real technical problem with how you send bank senior executives to jail. How do you impute to individuals the crimes of the corporation? This is where you get the odd handful of legal scholars across the road, across the world, trying to confront this. But the problem is it starts from the mid-19th century when you get the creation of joint stock corporations and the chartering in which there are no restrictions on the company's operation. So the corporation becomes a person at law and is ultimately, so you can fine the corporation, but you can't send the corporation to jail. And so the joint stock corporation is itself a licence to corruption. And we see evidence of it on a daily basis, but somehow people don't put their thinking hats on. The Corporations Act is mega, and there's hardly anything in there about banking crime against its borrowing customers. There's a little known act I discovered called the Commonwealth Criminal Code Act 1995, which is referred to simply as the Criminal Code. And that's got a few good paragraphs in there about attributing corporate crimes to individuals. So some corporate crimes are due to lending managers, but then the CEO the management steps in to defend them. Some corporate crimes are instigated from the top, so ultimately the person getting all the dough and the board chairman are responsible for all crimes, but they are currently immune. You can send somebody to jail for insider trading, for buying shares when you know some dough, but to me, who cares? The stock market is a casino anyway, it's all insider trading. I don't give a damn about insider trading. Whereas at the moment, you cannot send a CEO to jail. And frankly, just about every CEO of the 4 major banks since the mid-80s needs to be in court and prosecuted with potential jail sentences, because crimes and fraud have occurred under almost every one of them. I can't think of one. That's in the very hard basket, but as we've seen in the media, there is this notion of criminal charges could be laid. We'll wait till we see it. That's recommendation 7. Recommendation 8, I've got 2 to go.
Keep going, all right.
Reform legal and judicial culture. Now, whether this was in the too hard basket, now in my submission to the Royal Commission, I said, forget it, there's no way you're ever going to get justice for bank victims until you reform the courts. Well, of course, they didn't pay any attention to it, because it's all an in-crowd, and even recent judges will never rat on their corrupt mates. There's a fundamental problem in the education of lawyers, that they're all suckled on contract law, and all people who sign a contract are equal at law. And I'll quote you something from the major banking law textbook in Australia, which everybody learns. Banking law textbooks are shocking. Quote, the lender-buyer relationship is based on contract, and the parties deal at arm's length with no obligation on either party to act with any higher duty to each other than that required by the law of the marketplace. So there's no such thing as fiduciary duty or duty of care. That's off somewhere else in equity, and that's irrelevant when you've got a small business or a farmer who has brains. the law of the marketplace, there's more decisions, especially Gleeson in the High Court in a non-banking case, that anybody with asymmetric power in a commercial relationship not merely has the right to use and abuse that power, but the absolute obligation to abuse that power. That's the ACCC brought that case, and they lost in court when the Chief Justice was Gleeson. And it's an absolute shock. So the law of the marketplace is the law of the jungle. So a combination of ignorance, bad training, but also complicity in the courts means bank victims will get justice in the courts on 1 in 100 occasions. There are also corrupt justices, and the most corrupt in terms of evidence available was former Chief Justice of Queensland, Paul de Jersey, now Governor of Queensland. Queensland is a disaster. Finally, recommendation 9, get rid of the revolving door. When you've got the NAB is the best of it, when it strategically hires BRACs, as some kind of consultant in Victoria. It gives BRACs the Commonwealth Games, etc. It's BRAC's government. It's strategically hired Sinodinos, Kelly O'Dwyer, Baird, and now to top it off, the chairman of the board is Ken Henry, ex-secretary of the Treasury. Now, what would current Treasury employees be thinking? They're the ultimate regulator of the financial system. This is the way to go. It's a monumental scam, and it's got to go. I'm interested in France, and the French have got this very elaborate anti-revolving door system, and they've even got a very fancy word for it. It's called deontology, and they've got a deontology commission. But ironically, there's more revolving door in France than you can shake a stick at. So and we know in US, so it's a universal problem, but it's tolerated here, and it's got to stop because they can collaborate in avoiding dealing with the problem. So there's my 9 recommendations. Finally, finish off with the Hayne Commission. Hayne was appointed by a Conservative right-wing government. Hayne is himself ultra-conservative. It was a very sophisticated, astute choice. If they'd chosen a carpetbagger, it would have been a joke. And there are plenty of carpetbaggers. But like the guys they put in charge of the building union through a commission, that kind of stuff. But he's also important, he's never presided over banking cases and litigation, and he's never acted for banks on the way up. So he's formally a clean skin, but he has some terrible decisions in the High Court regarding other issues, like putting to friends like refugees. So it's not a good look in terms of his background. He presided over one case that went to the High Court on banking, and he gave a very bad decision, just towing the party line. The interim report came out this afternoon. The volume 1, the executive summary is full of blah, a page and a half. Says greed is a problem, or greed's a problem, but so what? And big deal. That deals with nothing. The volume 1, the substance is 400 pages or something. I had a quick look at the key issue. Is when CBA took over Bank West in December 2008. There's 1,000 Bank West victims out there clamouring for justice. They've had 2 parliamentary committee inquiries, which were whitewashes. All the evidence was there. The report systematically toes the party the bank line. And indeed, on the day in which they started hearing the Bank West case on the 21st of May, Hodge, council assisting, closed it down in a sentence. So I think this is a conspiracy, there's multiple 40 pages on this issue, and I think the bulk report wouldn't have been written by Hayne himself. As we said on the way up, he's been sitting in the commission all day. So I think there's a conspiracy here because it is a fundamental Exhibit A case. Some of the Bank West victims, high-profile ones, lost $100 million or so. A guy called Sean Butler, hotelier in Perth, Rory O'Brien, developer in North Queensland. Their cases are so transparently reasonable that the bank brought in corrupt valuers and devalued their properties and didn't turn over their loans. So the Hayne interim report has failed the Bank West victims and they're spitting chips. And that's going to be a long-term fight. It's a very complex story, but the Labor government is implicated there. Labor, let's maybe talk about Labor in the discussion. So, as for response to the interim committee, and interim report, I'll finish up here. I grabbed two quotes from the web. So the ultimate outcome depends not on Hayne, it depends upon the politicians. And Frydenberg at the moment has no idea. He's talking complete rubbish, blaming it all on a weak ASIC. It's a worry. The banks are unrepentant, which is a crucial issue. Crocodile tears are unrepentant when the Commission disappears off the front page. Because the structural elements are the same, the pressure will go as usual. Two quotes, Andrew Thorburn, a professed Christian. Where we have made mistakes, we will own them and fix them. A total lie. The NAB, up with the CBA, is the most corrupt bank in Australia, and it's doing nothing, and it's still persecuting victims, and Thorburn and Henry are a disgrace. Next quote, Anna Bligh. What a shocker. Hired under recommendation by Andrew Thorburn at the ANB, the CEO of the Australian Bankers Association. Bankers accept full responsibility for these failures, and right now in every bank people are working day and night to make things right for their customers. Yeah, so rubbish. So there's a pantomime going on there of crocodile tears and harassment, strong words from bullies, but it's been going on for decades now, and as I said, I'm a pessimist, but there's my recommendation for an improvement. There we go.